everyone! Today in Lviv city, we are happy to greet one of Ukraine's closest friends, private philanthropist, seasoned farmer, and agricultural investor, Mr. Howard Buffett. Mr. Buffett, most of your charitable projects are related to the agricultural sector. Demining, irrigation, technical assistance to farmers. Why did you choose this as a priority over direct assistance to the armed forces, medical aid, or other areas?
Well, actually, we're doing a lot more than agriculture, but one of the reasons why we focus on agriculture is it's something I do at home. It's something I've spent the last 40 years involved with. So, you know, I would understand it better. And I also think that agriculture is going to be the fastest avenue back, the fastest way for Ukraine to rebuild their GDP. And so it's a critical part of it. So demining does clearly overlap with the agricultural part of it. But, you know, we're doing charitable work that we would characterize as most as we could as investment. So I divide it into two. I mean, there's some things like charity, like since the beginning of the war through this year, we should fund about 50 million meals to people on the front lines. So that's really charitable work. But on the other hand, we're rebuilding the police station in Bordianka. We're building 9 bridges in Kherson region. We're building the school feeding kitchens to feed into multiple schools in both Bucha and in the Kharkiv area. It's in a little smaller community. So it's not just agriculture, but we have made a big investment in agriculture as well. But for us as a foundation, we cannot support any kind of lethal or military action. So we have to look at what can we do that supports the country in terms of both the economy and trying to help. We can help rebuild in some ways, but we won't focus on rebuilding. We'll be selective about that where we think it makes a difference. But like the school feeding programs, those are things we do. And then, you know, we're here in Lviv today because we're going to participate in an event tomorrow that will launch Superhumans, which is a great program. The First Lady and others, of course, she's the lead, but, you know, it takes a lot of people to do this. And the whole team of Superhumans have been amazing. And, you know, unfortunately, the war is going to produce a lot of injured people that are going to need prosthetics. And so Superhumans is a really great program to do that. So we're doing much more than just agriculture, but of course agriculture will always be one of our top focused areas. And I think probably by the end of this year, besides feeding people on the front line, our biggest expenditure will probably be demining.
While Mr. Buffett was answering this question, our colleague sent us a video that he shot just a minute ago on one of the highways in Ukraine. The video shows a truck that delivers food to civilian population in the frontline regions. And yes, Mr. Buffett misspoke. To date, his foundation has funded through such charitable organizations as World Central Kitchen, GEM, and World Food Program 1 million meals for Ukrainians affected by the war.
All of the meals that we have supported, and whether they're you know, there are different kinds of, you know, food baskets, food kits, food boxes, all those things. We've done it through World Food Program, World Central Kitchen, through GEM, and they have reached. And I've been with them in some of the villages, and they're literally within a few kilometers sometimes of the front line. So the funding for our meals are all going to the front line or the area. You know, they would all be within 20 kilometers of the front line, I think. And so, you know, feeding 100 million meals, providing 100 million meals, to me, we're proud of that. I mean, it's so unfortunate that people need them, and you're providing food to people who used to provide food to the world, and that'll change. That'll correct itself. That'll go back to normal at some point. And demining are the two biggest things that we would be proud of from our foundation that we were able to do.
Howard Buffett is an American businessman, farmer, and philanthropist. He was born in 1954 in Nebraska in the family of the famous investor Warren Buffett. At the beginning of his career, Howard worked as an excavator and a picker. Afterwards, he realized that his vocation was farming. Mr. Buffett has been developing his agribusiness for almost 40 years. He currently operates family farms in Illinois and Nebraska and several research farms in Arizona and South Africa. Howard Buffett is a big supporter of no-till conservation agriculture, fighting for the sustainability of soil and water resources. Also, he worked as a commission on presidential debates for 20 years. Mr. Buffett is a director of Berkshire Hathaway. He also served on the board of several Fortune 500 companies, including the Coca-Cola Company. Howard Buffett is a chairman and CEO of the Howard G. Buffett Foundation, one of the largest private charitable foundations in the United States. The foundation invests primarily in global food security, conflict mitigation, and public safety. As part of the work of the foundation, Mr. Buffett visited more than 150 countries of the world, wrote 8 books on wildlife protection, and has received awards from many countries for his contribution to agriculture, journalism, photography, and philanthropic activities. As the largest private philanthropist for Ukraine, do you receive many proposals from people asking to help them with some kind of projects? And what are your criteria for selecting projects?
Yeah, we get a lot of requests, and of course, after we do this, we'll get more requests. You know, we get the more we're seen, and people think about us. Look, we're in a war, right? Ukraine is in a war, so our job is to understand where the greatest needs are and where can we have the most impact. So there's some things that are too big for us to do because we don't have enough money, and then there's things that government's not good at because it takes them too long to do it. So rebuilding the 9 bridges. I mean, we were asked about that. The U.S. Embassy actually brought that idea to us because it was something that the government here was trying to fund. And, you know, that's something that when the idea is mentioned to us, we can fund it in a month. I mean, like, we can move fast. And so our criteria would be, is it the greatest need, and how much impact can we have by funding it? And those are the things we look at. So we get requests for a lot of small things, but we're not set up to do small things. You know, we are looking for larger projects that will have impact, and preferably that would fit in the investment column. So, you know, there are going to be things that help people long term, and help communities long term, and help the economy long term.
Howard Buffett has outlined why his fund is mainly focused on large-scale infrastructure projects. However, he mentioned that small and medium-sized businesses in Ukraine also have a chance to receive assistance for their development. One example of this is the Course for Independence grant competition, which has launched last year in several regions in Ukraine. Entrepreneurs who required funds for the development of their business equipment were given the opportunity to participate. The competition was organized by Astarta Kyiv Agroprom Holding in collaboration with German development bank DEG and Believe in Yourself charitable foundation. This initiative reflects how big businesses during times of war have been actively involved in supporting communities, enhancing their abilities and resilience. Priority is given to those participants whose aim is to create additional job opportunities for vulnerable groups, such as internally displaced persons, families of military personnel, people with disabilities, and women affected by domestic and gender-based violence. Each of the 60 winners was awarded €12,000, and together they generated 394 new job opportunities.
And how do you ensure control over the implementation of charitable projects?
The United States is set up a little different than Ukraine in terms of the charitable organizations and nonprofit organizations. And we have a lot of rules we have to follow that our government sets up. So we have to work within those parameters in terms of what our rules are. And so that tends to drive us towards looking for nonprofits that are registered in the United States, or maybe some, like we're working with the Swiss, the Dutch, the UK organizations. So those will be organizations that are very familiar and have standards set up that are similar or in parallel to the United States requirements. So we do have to be fairly selective about who we can work with. But then there's several U.S. NGOs, nonprofits that we worked with a lot in Afghanistan and Congo and places. So we've gone to a couple of those organizations and just asked them if they could help us here, and they have. And so that's one way we build a lot of the infrastructure. And then, for instance, like what we've done with Victory Harvest, all of that equipment is provided in kind, and we have MOUs with Victory Harvest, and it was overseen. The establishment was overseen by I'll say the agricultural ministry, but I know there's a little more of a name to it. But and so we do it pretty carefully, and we tend not to spend cash in Ukraine. We've spent a little bit to support Victory Harvest, but we have a full-time accountant that every quarter we review the books, and they've been very good about providing the information. And so we really try to limit the exposure of having something go wrong. So far, things have gone pretty well.
Do you visit Ukrainian farmers during your trips to Ukraine? Who among them has left the brightest impressions personally on you, and why?
I've met a lot of different farmers. Every trip I've made, I've met with farmers. I think, it's hard to say one farmer, impressed me the most, but I've been in Kherson and all the way up along the front line and gone to farms that have been just completely devastated. Although we saw some in Bordianka area the other day that were completely devastated. So I think any farmer that has had everything he has taken away from him and is still there and still wants to farm and is determined to find a way to go back and farm, they all impress me. I mean, it's really hard to select one. I mean, we met with a farmer a couple of days ago that is determined to rebuild, and add on and expand his potato processing company. And he had all these, most everything was destroyed. And I don't know where that determination and willpower comes from, but farmers are pretty strong. So I think that the impressive thing is just I've not found a farmer, not met a farmer yet that's giving up. They're going to push forward, and they're going to find a way to get back in and farm. And that's what this country needs, because it's really important that the agricultural sector come back strong. Ukraine was known worldwide as a breadbasket to Europe. And I can tell you that as good and as hardworking as the Ukrainian farmers are, with more work, they can do better. And so I just think it's really critical to come back. And I'm confident that given any opportunity, the farmers in this country will come back.
As a media outlet that covers agriculture, we are always at the forefront of Ukraine's agricultural sector. With the full-scale Russian invasion, our journalists visited many farms that suffered from the occupiers' actions. We witnessed horrific stories of property loss and robbery of equipment and grain, but also incredible examples of the indomitable spirit of Ukrainian farmers. Despite the almost complete destruction of some farms, agrarians from frontline and deoccupied regions, like the legendary phoenix rising from the ashes, rebuilt, sowed and harvested last season.
I guess our agricultural frontline is one of the strongest front lines ever.
Well, the one thing about Ukraine is you're fortunate. So we, from the standpoint that you have incredible soils and incredible large amounts of great soils, that is not the case in a lot of places. We've worked in a lot of places, but, you go to Africa, you go to Central America, you go to Colombia, you go to these different places. They have a lot of challenges just because of what nature gave them. And in the Ukraine, nature gave you an abundance of the ability to produce. And so the biggest challenge will be getting the demining accomplished and getting it done in a quick enough way that you can bring that land back into production. And if you look at how much of the country, some of the numbers you see say up to 30% are affected. That doesn't mean they're all mined. It just means you have to clear that much of the land and understand what's mined and what's not mined. But that's a huge proportion of your arable land. And so the most important thing for agriculture going forward right now.
And what do you think, how many years?
How many years?
It will take to make our land
Well,
clear?
it's going to depend on the Ukrainian government understands the importance of this. In fact, it's most of what we talked to the president about the other day. I think they're in the process of putting together a team. They want the best experts in the world to help them. This is not a new problem. This has been a problem that has been addressed for many years in a number of countries, some in Europe, some in other locations, and obviously in Asia. And so I think that you will see the government really try to streamline the process and put together the kind of team that's technical, legal, policy driven, that can get the right things in place. And then it's going to take a lot of money. But I also believe that demining will be one of the highest priorities of anybody, from the World Bank on down through governments, because they're going to understand the importance. So I think the funding will come, and it will be one of the, if not, it'll probably be the largest area where we spend money. So if all of that takes place and they have the right group and it's streamlined, you raise the funding, then I think you can look at a lot of progress within 5 to 10 years. Otherwise, it could take decades if you don't do it right and do it quickly. But 5 to 10 years is still a long time. And the worst part, through that process, farmers are going to lose equipment, you're going to lose lives, and it's not easy. And so it will require, I think the government's doing the right thing. The president is focused on the right thing, and he's pushing people to figure out how to do this. And we're looking at some innovative ideas. I mean, we're working with a few of our friends here that they brought an idea forward that we are going to try to do. I think we'll be able to do it. We have to find out, from our standpoint, how we can do it. Mm-hmm. But, we hope that we can fund the process of starting to develop demining and building demining equipment in Ukraine. And that's an important step because, not only does it create the jobs here and it creates the expertise here and the technology is shifted and you can use it to build your own base, but it's important that Ukraine be able to participate in cleaning up these mines themselves in a way that's much bigger than it is now. And so I think that, that's an idea we really, want to go back to the U.S. and figure out legally how do we do that. And I think we'll figure it out. But that's the kind of thing we want to do. We've worked on technology to develop a drone that can recognize both shallow graves as well as identify and map landmines. That we own that technology. Okay, we paid to develop it, and we own it, and that is something that we could certainly give to and allow people in Ukraine to use. And so the more that can be done in Ukraine, the more that builds Ukraine. And so that's our philosophy. That will take a little more time than some of the things. I mean, I'm not very patient about this because. Things have to happen fast. They really have to happen fast. And so some things will take us a little more time than other things, but that is what we believe needs to happen. So, and I also feel like the president has put some great people in place to be able to accomplish this. And so the leadership is there, and he's working on making sure that, you know, these are people that are leaders, that are honest, that are transparent, that are accountable, and that also the world has to see that as well. And I think that that's very high on the agenda, and I think it's clear that that's one of the highest priorities that the president has.
Would you like to buy land in Ukraine and engage in agricultural business? And actually, if you would like to buy land, I want to ask you where, in what region? Well,
I won't buy land in Ukraine for a couple of reasons, but I'm a little old to restart where I'm going to farm. But it would be a conflict of interest for us to do something in Ukraine from a business standpoint, while we're funding so many things to try to support both agriculture and other, you know, the other industries. So we would not enter into any kind of a business in Ukraine. It's not because I don't think that other people should enter into the business. It's just it wouldn't be right for us to do it. It would just be a conflict of interest.
And what do you think? Could Ukraine become an attractive place for large international investors after our victory?
Well, I wouldn't wait for the victory. I would say there are some things that, and I actually think agriculture is one of those areas that I would say is an area that you could invest in now. Not in everything, not everywhere, okay? But, you know, we've been working on building a couple of grain transfer facilities, one on the Romania border, one on the Polish border. And I think there's this, the people we're working with are very, very, very committed to doing it. But they're also looking at it more like we have to wait till the war is over. And we can't wait till the war is over. You have to invest now for several reasons, and one is because Ukraine needs some of the facilities. So if the Black Sea Agreement continues to have trouble, you know, you've got to move the grain out. I mean, that's one of the most important things that Ukraine must achieve. You've got to move grain out of this country. I think that those types of facilities and the other things that will facilitate the moving of grain, you can invest in those now. I think you could invest in irrigation now. We can't get U.S. companies to come over here to participate in the irrigation sector right now because of the war. And I try to explain to them, you know, there are areas where you can work that are pretty safe. They're not 100%. But nothing's ever 100% anyway. But, you know, of course, you know, I think it's more psychological than it is practical in terms of some of their resistance and concern. So we push, but it's still hard. But I just don't, you know, in 2010, I was in Afghanistan, and I was going through the Kabul area, and you'd see this, you know, a new building. And I said, well, you know, you're in the middle of war. Who built a new building? I said to the guys I was with, I said, which are actually a bunch of Navy SEALs. And I said, well, why would they be rebuilding this in the middle of war? And they said, well, if you're not showing progress now, people cannot have hope. People will think things cannot change. So later in that trip, we flew out and met with some farmers, and they asked me, I said, what's the most important thing? And we had never built any infrastructure before with our money. And this farmer says, well, the most important thing is to have a building at our college campus so our own kids can study agriculture. And I started to say, well, we just don't build infrastructure. And my son was with me, and he said, Dad, you weren't listening the other day. He said, you know, and so I thought about it for a minute. I thought, well, if that's the most important thing to you here in Afghanistan, then we'll do it. So that was the first time we built infrastructure, and it was a learning lesson for me. And I, you know, I'm always charging ahead, so I don't always listen as well as I should. But the truth is, you have to listen to the people in Ukraine to tell you what do they need to move forward. And so I'm trying to do a better job of listening, and the staff and my team are great at listening. And so, you know, I've learned lessons over the years. And one of them is that, you know, when you're in the middle of war, you can't just stop. Everything can't come to a stop. In fact, it's so important that the people that are here in Ukraine, see things happening, and that they see that, when the war is over, it's just already going to be better. And it's really important not to think about it in terms of, and look, there's some businesses that are not going to invest until the war is over. You have to be realistic about it. But what we do need to do is look at Ukraine and say, where can we invest right now? Where is it safe enough? Where's the return going to be? And how do we get it done? So agriculture has some of that opportunity.
If you were offered a position as an external advisor to the president of Ukraine or prime minister on the development of the agricultural sector or other area, would you consider such an offer like that?
What I've told a few people that have talked to us about different ideas, as long as I'm capable of doing the job and I'm qualified to do the job, I will do anything to support Ukraine. I don't think that's probably, the best use of my time, unless it's very specific to something I can help with. But I won't say no to anything that I think I can contribute my time and effort to that will help Ukraine. I mean, this is the time that everybody needs to step up and do whatever they can do. So if I'm asked to do something in some kind of lead role, of course I would say yes, as long as I feel I'm qualified and the right person to do it.
It's obvious that Ukrainian agri must catch up with standards and level of European and North American agriculture. Consequently, Ukrainian farmers have to learn a lot from their Western colleagues. And what do you think? What Ukrainian farmers can teach them?
Well, if you look at the most recent times, the last, 30 or 40 years, 50 years, the Ukrainian farmers have had to make huge adjustments. They came out of a system that was a collective type system. They had to make adjustments as to how to learn how to invest and how to operate their farms. And so I think that the lesson is that they are prepared, they're getting better, they're prepared to even be better, and that should drive an interest on our part in supporting Ukrainian farmers. I do think that there's always, when you get to the United States, they're looking at, Argentina and Brazil, and I don't think they've traditionally looked at Ukraine as a big competitor. We usually look to Argentina and Brazil, but I think as Ukraine builds their agriculture back, the United States farmers need, and European farmers need, to have the attitude that these are our partners and that there's room for everybody, and that we need to help make Ukraine come back as strong and stronger. I do, one of the things we will do post-war, after your victory, is we will absolutely continue to invest in how to better develop some techniques and farming practices in Ukraine, and there is room for improvement for that. I mean, we are very engaged in conservation farming all over the world, and we've learned how to do it with smallholder farmers. We've learned how to do it on big farms. We've done a lot of research ourselves. So there's a lot of space for Ukrainian farmers to improve their production, and that just improves the world. I mean, I think that as farmers anywhere in the world look to Ukraine, it's imperative for us to see them as partners and friends and not as competitors. And I think that the future for Ukrainian farmers will be very bright if we can get the mining cleaned up, if we can get the investment back into the area. It's not going to be easy. I mean, no one should think it's going to be easy. It's not. It's going to be very difficult, but it can all be done. And I do think you have some great leadership in the government to do it.
Everyone knows that Mr. Buffett is a supporter of conservative no-till farming. In Ukraine, there are more and more farmers who are looking towards minimizing tillage, which can be a good alternative to traditional agricultural technologies. We asked Mr. Buffett about the prospects of Ukrainian farmers refusing to plow the soil.
Well, and some of the farmers we met this week, there's a few of them that are no-tilling, and Of course, conservation ag is much bigger than just no-tilling, but that's a critical component of it. That's the most important part of it, really. I've already talked to the guys back home, and we're looking at how we can get some equipment over here to help them with their sunflowers, because they cut sunflowers differently than we do, and they have a lot of stock standing up. Well, they want to disc them under, and I said, no, there's several alternatives to that. So we're actually literally, I was on email today before I got here talking about how many pieces of equipment we could get in a container and get it over here and allow farmers to try it and see how it works. And that's the way it's going to change. I mean, we're going to have to slowly introduce the ideas, and we're going to find those farmers that are innovative. You will find plenty of Ukrainian farmers that will quickly understand that these things work, and they save them money, they help them preserve their soil. And if there's any place in the world where farmers should focus on preserving their soil, it's in Ukraine, because they have a huge advantage now. You don't want to lose that advantage.
We were always interested to hear Mr. Buffett's vision of a strategy to improve the efficiency of Ukraine's agriculture, and today we got this chance.
There's a lot of discussion. There's some new laws. There's some different ways of looking at what Ukraine might what Ukraine will look like in the future in terms of who owns land. And I have a very strong opinion about this, that the best way forward is not farmers that are farming 70,000 hectares or 50,000 hectares. The best way forward is to support even the very smallest farmers. Land consolidation will happen over time. I mean, it happens in the United States. It happens anywhere you look. Keeping the culture of agriculture intact is to support all sizes of farms, but you want a very strong, a large, strong kind of middle area, whether it's 500 hectares or 1,500 hectares or 3,000 hectares, but and you'll have different sizes of farms for sure. But if the policy drives farming towards just big mega farms, that's not good for Ukraine. It's not good. It will take a lot of farmers, and they'll end up in urban areas. They can't use their skills. They can't get jobs. It overburdens the systems that are in place. You want to keep farmers on the farm. That's what you want to do. And so I think the policies and the practices and the advocacy that keeps a strong farming community from those who farm, there's nothing wrong with farming 2 or 3 hectares if that's what you do and that's how you survive. So the focus should be, in my opinion, the focus should be on how do we keep people in their homes, on the farm, producing at different levels, and that can be incorporated into a whole, the whole process of the food system in Ukraine. And then I just feel like if you want to talk about conservation farming, I can tell you this because I have friends at home that farm 40,000 acres, and they're big. That's big for us. You guys have much bigger farms here than we have in the United States, for the most part. Not everywhere, but. And, it's harder for them. It's harder for you to take care of more, right? So, somewhere it depends on the farmer, it depends on his investment in equipment. It depends on his training and education. But there's a tipping point where you get bigger and bigger, and you can't do the job as well as you can if you stay at a certain size. And so, I know there'll be plenty of people that argue with me about that, but I've watched what's happened in the United States. Small towns have closed up, your school systems go broke, your roads start to deteriorate. I mean, you have to have rural investment. In fact, the best thing Ukraine can do in their agriculture is invest in rural areas. I mean, that's how we became a great superpower in terms of our agricultural production. We invested in rural America, and we did it through education, extension, research. We did it through a huge rural electrical project. I mean, early in the 30s and 40s and 50s, I mean, we made huge investments in the rural area. And if Ukraine makes investments in the rural area, and there are policies that are going to keep farmers on the farm, and that doesn't mean there won't be consolidation. It just means you're consolidating, a lot of really small pieces of land into somebody who's farming 500 or 1,500 hectares. It doesn't mean you're taking and putting all the farmers that are farming 1,000 and 3,000 hectares out of business so somebody can farm 70,000 hectares. It's not a good business proposition to put farmers out of business. My message to the Ukrainian farmers is stay strong and resilient through the war, but hold your ground when it comes to the policy changes that may be in front of you, so that we can keep as many farmers, Ukraine can keep as many farmers on the farm as possible. So every size of farm is important. The smaller farmers are important, the middle-sized farmers are important. It won't be to Ukraine's long-term advantage to have policies in place that create mega farms, these big farms, 70,000, 80,000 hectares. Farming and farmers do better when they really maintain control over their land and are able to invest in their land and make their land more productive. And those are farmers that they could be 500 hectares, 1,500, 3,000 hectares. But when you start getting to these mega farms, they're not an advantage. And one of the things they will do is they will push farmers off the land. They will create bankruptcies for farmers. And the other thing that'll happen, and I've seen it happen, is large foreign investors will come in. And so depending on what your law allows for who owns the ground is also an important factor. And I'm not against foreign investment at all, but if you have people coming in and they won't really be people, they'll be investment groups, and they'll raise money and they'll come in as an investment group and buy up large parts of land. They don't care about what that soil, what happens to that soil in the next 10 or 20 or 30 years. They don't care about the water resources, because they're going to take everything out of that land that they can take for their benefit, and then Ukraine is left with that. The biggest benefit from having smaller and middle-sized and some larger farmers is that they will take care of Ukraine's future. They will invest in Ukraine's future, and their future as a farmer is your soil. It is your water resources. It's how you treat that, and that's your future productivity. So I encourage anybody in the government that's involved in the policy to really weigh the consequences of super fast and super large land consolidation, because I don't think that overall that's an advantage for Ukraine in the long term.
Mr. Buffett, thank you so much.
Now I get hate email from all the big farmers. Seventh trip since the war. I was here in 1991. Can you imagine? When it was still part of the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How you found Ukraine in 2023 now? Compare with Ukraine 30 years ago, when it was still part of the USSR.
So I was asked that question by another reporter. My answer is that Ukraine in the middle of a war has more life and hope than during the Soviet Union. I mean, in the Soviet Union time when I was here, the streets were just empty. You couldn't buy things. People's attitudes were not good. And I specifically remember comparing it in my mind to when I was here last June in Kyiv. And Kyiv was just full of life. And you go through on the weekend and the parks are full and the kids are playing. There's people playing the guitar. I mean, it just flags are flying. So the life in Ukraine, even under war conditions, is so much more vibrant than when people were living in the under the Soviet Union, and it just a significant difference. I'm 68 years old, so the last few wars that I've experienced from the I would pay attention to were Vietnam and Afghanistan, and you had Desert Storm, but those were different kinds of wars, and I've never seen a country that has had so much resiliency and commitment to defending their country. And it's just, Ukraine is just a nation of courage, and it's a great inspiration, I think, to other people. It should be. I mean, I think you're teaching the world something. I really do.